It's my honor, my schos. Okay. So you can hear me clearly, right?
Yeah,
I just want to make
very
sure. Okay, beautiful. Thank you. So I am really honored to be here with all of you on this very special evening. Jarchei Kallo, bringing together so many people from the great historic Amsterdam community of Holland, and I know joining us from various European countries. I want to welcome everybody who's here, everybody who's gracing us with your wonderful presence. I'm delighted and I'm privileged to be part of this Jarchei Kallo and the joint efforts of so many of the leaders of your community in bringing together so many Jews to learn, to explore, and to grow. I'm just going to apologize 1 second. I want to get a cup of water because I'm a little hoarse, so give me 1 second. Okay, my apologies. So welcome to the Amsterdam Jewish community. Welcome to all of you who are joining us from wherever you're joining us around Europe for this historic and incredible Jarchei Kallo. I know it's been going on for so many years, since 1991, I believe. So this is the
1990.
1990.
Okay.
So this is the 33rd.
32nd.
Jarchei Kallo. As you know, 32 in Hebrew is Lamed Beis, Lev, the heart. So may this Jarchei Kallo be infused not just with intellect, but also with emotion, with a heart. And as it says in Sfarim, that the first letter of the whole Torah is a Beis, the last letter of the whole Torah is a Lamed. Torah starts off with Bereshis Bara and it ends off with La'enei Kol Yisrael. Beis and Lamed makes up a Lev, because the Torah really is our heart, and it brings our hearts together. It creates from many hearts one heart, Lev Echad Lavinu Shabashamayim. So thank you for this opportunity to address the 32nd Jarchei Kallo here in the Amsterdam community, and I really appreciate it. It's a schus to be here with you, and a great privilege to be here. I also want to acknowledge the fact that this is dedicated in honor of the yahrzeit, in tribute to the yahrzeit of the great chassid, very special Jew, Reb Moshe ben Sion Rubenson, from a city called Karalevitz, which was a city of many great chassidim. Reb Moshe ben Sion Rubenson, also known as Karalevitzer, was of course the father of Rebbetzin Dobe Vorst and her husband Reb Yitzchak. They've been together, the Chabad Shluchim, the ambassadors of Lubavitch, for more than 50 years. So thank you so much. Thank you for all your work. And you should have Arichis Yomim and Shanim Tovus, and tremendous Hatzlacha, Nachas, prosperity, good health, and Simcha, and tremendous success in your Avodas HaKodesh. And may the memory and the light and the inspiration of Reb Moshe ben Sion, of your father and father-in-law, continue to serve as an eternal source of blessings and light and inspiration, not only to you and your families and all of us and the whole community, but to all of Klal Yisrael until the great moment of Hekitzav V'Rananu Sheichna Yafar. It's also an honor to be part of this celebration, celebrating the 80th, the milestone of the 85th. Oh, wow. Okay. I stand corrected. You look very young. Of Rabbi Dr. Elibio who was born, of course, in Hamburg, Germany, and miraculously was saved from the extermination program of the Nazi Holocaust. And today, to be able to be here with you and to celebrate this milestone together with you, we could say truly, Shechiyanu, V'kimanu, V'higiyanu Lizman Hazeh, to pay tribute to your Mesiras Nefesh and to your dedication to the community, emerging from Bergen-Belsen with your parents and returning to Amsterdam after the terrible darkness, and then using your experience and your education to become a source of so much wisdom and healing and light to the community for so many decades is really extraordinarily inspiring. So thank you. Thank you, Reb Eli. Thank you, Dr. Bio. Thank you, Rabbi Bio, for being the chaver, for being such a source of light and inspiration. And I know that even after your official retirement, there was only the beginning of new work and new leadership. And during your tremendous life, you have enriched and you continue to enrich this community with so much wisdom and so much love and so much scholarship, Torah, and your Shemayim. And together, during your life, your esteemed wife, Susie, who has always been your right hand, and known for your hospitality, warmth, and insights and wisdom. It's an honor to be part of the celebration. And I join humbly with the entire audience and the entire Kehillah community to wish you Arichas Yamim V'Shanim Tovos, many, many, many long, happy, healthy, prosperous years, together with all of your loved ones, together with the entire community. And thank you for everything. And may Hashem give you only bracha and atzlacha, simcha, harchavas hadas, menuchas hanefesh, and years of tremendous, tremendous atzlacha and achievements that will even eclipse your achievements of previous years, if that's even possible. And mazel tov. And thank you for the opportunity. So let's get right into it. The topic that was allotted to me today to discuss this Jarchei Kallo is, I have to say, it's a very sensitive topic. And it's really, the question of, as somebody put it, as one of the organizers put it, my own well-being versus my relationship with others, or the COVID dilemma, watching ourselves, or do we open our hearts to others? Yeah. That's how the dilemma was phrased. So we live in such a time when people's comments and opinions are often so judged and scrutinized under the radar that it's almost like whatever you say, you're going to offend somebody, right? Today we live in a climate, if I say this, you offend one group of people. You say this, you offend another group of people. And every group of people says, well, if you offend them, there's nobody to offend. They're completely crazy. They're insane. And this group says, no, they're insane. Yeah. Some people say these ones are meshuggah, these group are dangerous, these are scientific, they are unscientific. The people living with fantasies, these are people not living with fantasies. It's a very emotionally strained world today. There's so much division and so much suspicion and so much stereotyping that it's almost, you have to take sides, because if you have an opinion, somebody's going to get upset at you. But I'm not going to do that. I'm sorry. So I don't know if I'm going to get everybody upset at me or I'm going to get nobody upset at me. I'm going to ask Hashem to allow me to be his conduit and try to communicate a message that I think is important today. Now, I have to say that I'm not a doctor. I'm not a physician. I'm not an expert on the coronavirus and all of its variants. I'm not an expert on viruses. So why do I speak to you today? I speak to you today as somebody who tries to represent, at least in some humble fashion, the teachings of Judaism, as a rabbi, as a teacher of Torah. And that's the message I want to bring to you today. And it's not really focusing only on corona or COVID, those who are vaccinated, those who are not vaccinated, how we deal with this group, that group, but really a message that deals with everything in life, including Corona and including dilemmas that come up with Corona. And I think it's so important to appreciate two principles in Judaism that are fundamental to our culture, fundamental to our heritage, and fundamental to our faith. The first is we all understand that for Yiddishkeit, for Jewish people, the preservation of life and of good health is of utmost importance. We have a mitzvah of Irapa Yirape. God says, when somebody is ill, we try to turn to experts, to professionals who understand at least better than us, and we get their guidance, we get their mentorship. That's principle number one. This is the principle of Kedushas HaChayim, the sanctity of life. We do everything to preserve life, however we can, under natural circumstances. In fact, the Torah tells us to violate almost every single mitzvah, including eating Yom Kippur, violating Shabbos to save somebody's life, even if it's only a small doubt, maybe their life can be saved, even for a short time. We violate almost every commandment in the 630 mitzvahs of Torah. There's only 3 things we don't do to save a life. We don't murder, adultery, idolatry, but everything else we violate every mitzvah in order to save a life, because saving a person's life, and it begins, of course, with your own life, protecting and preserving a person's life, trumps almost every single other consideration in Judaism. We hold life to be holy. For this, there's a great Jewish anecdote, allow me to share with you. There were 3 clergy who went into a bar or went into a Starbucks, a rabbi, a priest, and a minister. And they started to discuss what they would like to hear people say at their funeral. And the priest says, I would love to hear people say at my funeral, you know, he was a true servant of the Lord. He brought the light of God into many, many people's lives. That's what I would like to hear people say. The minister says, I would like to hear somebody say at my funeral, he was a real friend. You can count on him in moments of distress. When you're going through difficulties, he was there for you always. The rabbi, what about you? What would you like to hear people say at your funeral? And the rabbi says, I would love to hear somebody say at my funeral, you know, I think he's moving, which of course represents very much the Jewish idea that we are obsessed with life. We are not a culture obsessed with death. And this is, by the way, a big thing, because in ancient times, death was an obsession of religion. In Judaism, in the whole Torah, we don't even have mention clearly of the afterlife. Why not? The Chayvus HaLevavos, the duties of the heart, the famous book by Rabbeinu Bechai Ibn Pekuda of the 11th century, says, why doesn't the Tanakh explicitly talk about Gan Eden, paradise, Olam Haba, the next world? There's many intimations to it in the Talmud and the Medrash and the Zohar and the Kabbalah talk a lot about it, but it's not so explicit clearly in the Tanakh. And one of the answers is because, it's very interesting, because when you talk about the afterlife, you could sell people anything you want. You could tell them that when you die, you're going to have 72 pies of pizza or 72 sushi rolls or 72 whatever. I'm not going to get into the details. You could sell whatever you want. I could sell you, I come from New York, I could sell you the Brooklyn Bridge and the Williamsburg Bridge and the Tappan Zee Bridge and the Whitestone Bridge and the GW. And I could sell Amsterdam too. You know, whoever came back to report. The uniqueness of the Torah is that it speaks about this world, and that can be vindicated, that can be authenticated. You know, when the Torah told the Jewish people that you should observe Shemitah, the sabbatical year, the 7th year, which is this year, 5782. And God says, I'm going to bless the 6th year grain, that you'll have grain for the 6th year and the 7th year and the 8th year, because during the sabbatical year, there was no plowing and there was no planting, and you couldn't sell your fruits, couldn't do merchandise with it. You couldn't use it as sales transaction. You couldn't do business with it. These are things that can be vindicated and authenticated in this world. But there's also another answer, and that is because in cultures that were completely obsessed with the myth of death, and death was glorified, Judaism says we hold life to be sacred, not because we don't believe in the afterlife. Of course, the soul is eternal, the soul doesn't die. But because the life in this world is really the ultimate purpose of creation, transforming our world into a landscape of goodness and kindness, making the world a dwelling place for the Ribbono Shel Olam, a dwelling place for Hashem, transforming earth into an abode for the divine, saturating it with compassion, with ethics, with morality, with goodness, with kindness, with holiness. That became the purpose of Judaism. So the rabbi says, I wish somebody would say he was moving. In fact, Moshe, at his last speech, the last days of his life, he tells the Jewish people there's a path of life and there's a path of death. I want you to choose life. Why do we need Moshe to tell us to choose life? Who doesn't choose life? Every animal chooses life. Every insect chooses life. Every tree chooses life. It's genetically embedded in our very structure that we choose life. We do anything for survival if we're normal and healthy. The answer is because Moses understood that with the suffering that the Jewish people may endure, we may become and develop into a culture that chooses death. After the Holocaust, Dr. Bio could talk about this, after the Holocaust, you would expect that if there would ever been a culture of suicide bombers, it should have been Jews who would look at themselves and say, life in this world is worthless. Let's blow ourselves up with the enemy. But we never did that. After every difficult moment, Jews rose up and said, let's choose life. We chose to live and we chose to love. The Holocaust generation shows, in most part, to rebuild, to get married, to recreate families. No, it was not perfect. Their children suffered. Their grandchildren still suffer, many of them. It was not perfect. But they did the best they can to recreate normalcy, to recreate families, to recreate communities, to rebuild Israel, to rebuild the diaspora, Jewish communities all over the world, not forgetting the memory of their loved ones who perished in the millions. How did we do it? Because of those two words of Moshe, choose life. In every situation, don't choose death. Don't choose despair. Don't choose depression. Don't choose surrender. Choose life. Choose to live. Choose to love. And we have embraced that commandment of Moses. And that's why we're here today. 4,000 years, 3,000 years later, not only surviving, but thriving. And not only thriving materially, but thriving spiritually and thriving communally. And with all of our setbacks and with all of our fails and with all failures and with all of our challenges and with all of those things that need repair, those two words, choose life. We believe in life. Echoes and resonates in the very psyche of the Jewish people as a whole and of every Jew as an individual. And therefore the preservation of life and the sacredness of life for Jews trumps everything. The Jewish law is that the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, on Yom Kippur, in the Holy of Holies, he's in the middle of doing the spiritual work of the holiest day of the year. And if the high priest finds out that there's a little child or an old man or an old woman, maybe a vegetable, and their life is in danger and the high priest could do something to save their life, he has to throw away everything. Throw away everything. He's standing in the Holy of Holies and go tend to the health of that individual person. You say, come on, you're standing in front of God, it's Yom Kippur. But you could save a Jewish life, even if it's only a doubt, even if it's for a few minutes, even if they're going to live maybe 1 or 2 days. The high priest throws everything away because the priority of the sacredness of life in Judaism is above everything, which is why peace means so much. So this is one component that we always have to remember. And we have to respect it in ourselves, and we have to respect it in somebody else. Now there's another component I want to talk about. And this has to do with humility. It has to do with humility, okay? And I'm going to say this with a lot of sensitivity, but I want you not to hear only the external words, to be sensitive to what I'm saying. I find that we're living in a time of tremendous arrogance. The definition of science is humility. The definition of science is curiosity, inquisitiveness. Shouldn't have the coronavirus taught us humility? Let's face it, for weeks and months, doctors did not know what in the world to do. I live in New York. I saw what was happening. Ambulance after ambulance taking patients to the hospital and nobody coming back, many of them not coming back alive. Because there was so much ignorance. People didn't realize, people weren't aware. That should teach us humility. As much progress as we have made in 5,000 years of medicine, we still don't know so many secrets of biology. In fact, the worst thing a doctor could say, from my perspective, is, I know everything there is to know about medicine. The worst thing a therapist can say, in my opinion, is, I know everything about human brains and human emotions. The worst thing a rabbi could say, in my opinion, is, I know everything there is to know in Torah. You're talking about wisdom that is infinite. We still don't know the secret of one cell. We still don't understand the depth of one atom. We're still trying to wrap our brains around quantum physics, which is so filled with paradoxes. We still don't understand the nature of light. And we still don't know about so much about viruses. We know a lot, thank God. And therefore, medicine has come such a long way. We know so much more about the brain. We know so much more about biology. But nonetheless, relative to what there is to know, I am certain that in 50 years, 100 years from now, we're going to look back and we're going to laugh at our levels of ignorance. So it's so important for people to speak about these things with a healthy dosage of humility, and not with this absolute arrogance and decisiveness that I have it all figured out. And if you listen to me, what I'm saying, it's the divine commandment. Everybody is entitled to opinions, but it's important to listen. It's important to question ourselves. It's important to be inquisitive. It's important to be curious. It's important to know how much we don't know. It's important to realize that in ignorance, we are all wealthy, not because we don't have good brains, but because the wisdom of God's universe reflects its creator and it's infinite. So a good dosage of humility by all of us, laymen and physicians and rabbis and doctors and scientists and healers and gurus, and especially politicians and journalists and essayists and thinkers. This judgmentalism, this arrogance that if you disagree with me, you're canceled. And if you have an opinion that's a little different than my opinion, I can't look at you. I can't talk to you. That's not the way sophisticated people behave. I may have a serious disagreement with you, and I may think you're dead wrong. But what happened is we all go into not all of us, I can't speak about you. I know what's happening in some places here. People run into their cocoon, into their sheltered mode. They only talk to people who think like them, who talk to them, who talk like them, who agree with everything. And I have to cut you off of my life because we see things differently. And what happens if somebody sees things differently? And even if you think they're absolutely wrong, have a conversation. Doesn't mean you have to agree. But this stubbornness and this refusal to give anybody else the benefit of the doubt. If you disagree with me, you must be crazy or cruel or a meshugana. Relax. You can have your opinions. You can respect another person's opinions. And if you really disagree and there's a fundamental disagreement, you can do it in a kind way, in a respectful way, in a pleasant way. Part of the problem is fear. When people, I want to tell this to you, it's important. Tyrants over the generations knew you want to treat people like sheep, inculcate them with fear. Trotsky knew this. Lenin knew this. Stalin knew this. Yeah, Himmler knew this. Yamach Shemam, all these Yamach Shemoiniks. You inculcate people with fear and then you control them. Judaism is not a people that is sustained by fear. The Baal Shem Tov's father told him before he died, he was 5 years old. He said, Yisrolik, two things. Don't fear anybody or anything in the world but God. And the second thing is, love every Jew with every fiber of your being. And he left this 5-year-old boy orphaned. And he became one of the most greatest influencers of the Jewish world. The holy Baal Shem Tov, who was born in 1698 and died 1760 on Shavuos. The holy Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, and I know that Dr. Bio comes from a very distinguished Hasidic family, so I'm specially mentioning the Baal Shem Tov in your honor. These two foundations are so important because number one, we fear God. We don't fear people. People are mortal. People are human. People make mistakes, even though we respect people. And we ought to seek guidance from people who have experience, people who have maturity, people who have awareness. But we don't worship people. We don't surrender our lives to people. We respect people. We can disagree with people. We don't become infatuated by people. We don't deify people. We don't do that. And we're not afraid of people. We're afraid of God. And what the Baal Shem Tov's father was telling him is, if you become afraid of people, then your fear is endless. If you're afraid of God, you don't have to fear people. Because if you're not afraid of God, you have to fear people. There's always another person inculcating fear in you, whether it's the newspaper, whether it's this website, whether it's that website, whether it's this social media platform, whether it's your wife, your husband, your mother-in-law, your father-in-law, your cousin, your politician, your president, your prime minister, your mayor, your governor, your doctor. There's somebody going to inculcate fear in you. But if you have fear from God, if you have Yireh Shamayim, you don't have to fear people. God runs the world. God orchestrates what happens. Listen, understand, v'rapa yirape. That's why the Talmud says, Toiv sheberoifim legehenim. The best of doctors belongs in Gehenim. How do we explain that? Doctors save our lives every day. The answer is the best of doctors. Sometimes the best of doctors grow arrogant. Yeah? Dr. Bio can teach us all about humility, but sometimes I know doctors, they become so arrogant. And people are afraid to ask them questions because they look at you as though you know nothing. People are afraid. Real top doctors are the humble ones, the people that know that we know a lot, but we know so little. Real doctors realize how much of the human psyche we don't understand. Sometimes we know everything that it says in textbooks, but do we know everything about trauma? Do we know everything about the relationship between the spiritual and the physical, between the soul and the mind and the body and the brain? Do we understand the secrets of genes? Do we know what epigenetics is, how much our genes carry from thousands of years? Do we understand the holistic nature of the body? Sometimes I become an expert. I once told somebody, I was once speaking to a group of therapists, and I said, there's two types of therapists, two types of psychiatrists, two types of psychologists. Some of them, they have textbooks. And when a patient comes, they feel like I have to fit you into the textbook. What if you don't? I'll change some stuff. Oh, you're bipolar. You're schizophrenic. You have defiance disorder. You have clinical depression. I need you fit you into my textbook model so I can give you a medication and feel good about yourself. That's not real healing. Real healing is knowing that every human being is indispensable and unique. And even though we have so much knowledge and so much information and so many helpful textbooks and so many helpful medicines, but I don't try to fit the person into a predefined textbook case. It's the other way around. I try to tune in my knowledge and I try to be humble and open myself up to the unique situation of this person. I don't just give an easy diagnosis for a person. I have the sensitivity of understanding that there's so much that I may not understand. There's so many influences that I may not be aware of. So therefore, when I hear somebody who's arrogant, I shut down. Where's this arrogance coming from? You have certain information that's wonderful, and I'm going to ask you for it. But wisdom, by definition, is all about openness to the infinity of medicine, to the infinity of biology. That's why Toiv Sheberoifim, when a doctor thinks he's superior to everybody, Legehenim, be very suspicious, especially when there's arrogance and there are political motives and people get very biased and people start having agendas and people are dominated by fear. It's important to be able to have conversations that are based on humility, respect, cordiality, kindness. There's a lovely Hasidic interpretation. Toiv, the word toiv is the numerical value of 17. Tes is 9, Vav is 6, Vez is 2. Toiv sheberoifim. When a doctor only believes in toiv, in the 17 blessings of Shemona Esrei. We know Shemona Esrei means 18 because there's 18 blessings. Later they added one more. And one of them is Rifa'enu Hashem v'nei Rafe, God should heal us. But when a doctor doesn't believe in 18 blessings, only in 17 blessings, toiv, because he thinks all the healing comes from him or her, Legehenim, such a doctor you have to be very careful with. A real doctor knows I'm a conduit for God's healing. I'm always humble. I try to do the best I can, but always with the humility, and therefore I don't surrender to fear. So we have these two principles. Number one, we preserve life, and that's the most important thing. We preserve health, and we do everything to preserve health. Together with that, we don't become arrogant. We remain humble, and therefore we remain open, and we remain respectful. And therefore, it is so important to be able to appreciate the fact that fear paralyzes people. Because once there's fear inside of me, I become a very intolerant person in one way or in another way, in one extreme or another extreme. I have to be able to open myself up to thinking about things without this constant fear that makes people stop thinking. It turns them into robots. You'll forgive me. I see people who are like zombies. Whatever they hear, they completely surrender their life to their soul to, instead of being discerning, educating oneself, being open, trying to understand, trying to ask good questions, being curious, being inquisitive. And then when you reach decisions, those decisions come from a place of wholeness, of empowerment, not of insecurity, not of fear. And you're not angry. You don't get angry. And you don't shut down your mind. Don't let people shut down anybody's mind. It's not good. It's not a Jewish thing. We are critical thinkers. Look at the Talmud. We ask questions about everything. Don't stop asking questions. But fear causes people to stop asking questions. That's why, how do we celebrate Pesach? How do we celebrate our national day of liberation? We ask questions. Fear kashas. Father, I'm going to ask you 4 questions. Did anybody of you ever get an answer to your 4 questions at the Seder? I never did. I don't see anywhere in the Haggadah a clear answer to the 4 questions. In fact, 4 questions should be answered in 4 minutes. I don't know why we have to sit for 2 hours afterwards to discuss the 4 questions. But the truth is, my friends, it's the questions themselves that matter. Because what's the difference between a slave and a liberated person? What's the difference? What's the difference between somebody who's a slave and somebody who's free? And I would say the ability to ask questions. Slaves don't ask questions. They're not allowed to ask questions. If you ask a question, you get whipped. And they stop asking. What's the definition of a free person? You ask. Why? Because asking a question means I understand that I am not stuck. Asking a question is the courage to challenge the status quo. Asking a question means don't put me into a specific box and force me to remain shackled in those chains and in those ways of thinking. A free person is somebody whose neurons are free to explore new questions, new ideas, new problems, new ways of thinking about things. We realize that our neural pathways don't have to always go down the same trajectory. There are choices, there are alternatives. Asking questions is the symbol, it's the paradigm of a free human being and of a free society. Asking questions means I can explore. I can say, maybe it doesn't have to be this way. Maybe it shouldn't be this way. Maybe there's another way of doing this. Maybe there's another way of thinking about it. It's about the curiosity. It's about inquisitiveness. And whenever people are, their mouths are crushed, stifled, but I'm not allowed to ask, but I'm not allowed to question you. That's what fear does. It turns me into a cripple. The beauty of the Jewish people is we never stopped asking questions. We still don't stop asking questions. That's why when I see that people are dominated by fear, it's not a good sign. Be dominated by fear of God, by respect for the truth, by the search for truth, by the quest for truth. Which brings us now to the second instruction that the Baal Shem Tov's father told him. He told him, don't fear anybody besides God. Don't sell your soul to people. Don't sell your soul to politicians. Don't sell your soul to anybody. Not to doctors and not to anti-doctors. Not to this person, not that. You don't sell your soul. You learn from people. We respect people. The Baal Shem Tov's father told him one more thing. Love every person with every fiber of your being. That's the difference between fear of God and fear of people. When you fear God, you can love people. When you start fearing people, you start not loving people. You see, fear of God means I respect the fact that truth is always transcendent, that truth is beyond me, that truth is infinite. And then I could realize that in every person, there's something truthful. Every person is created in the image of God, and therefore every person has something inspiring to teach me. If I spend time with a person and I say, there's nothing inspiring about you, I find nothing inspirational about your life, I find you completely boring. I'm talking about if I think so, because we're all diplomatic and mention we like to speak nicely. But if that's my conclusion, it means that I am so deaf to the divine music vibrating through this person. Every person is created in the image of God. This means every person has something to teach me. Every person has something to teach me. If I feel there's a person who has nothing to teach me, it's because I'm deaf. It's because I am stuck. It's because I am blind. It's because I am in a very cloistered space. It's because I'm homophobic. When I'm open to the truth, I know every person has something to teach me. You know why? Because every person carries the imprint of God, and every person carries the unique imprint of God. Every human being is an indispensable note in the cosmic symphony, and therefore everyone has a song to sing that nobody else before them or afterwards has to sing, could sing. And therefore every person is a source of inspiration, a source of light, because there's a story that you bring to the world. There's a story that you share with the universe that nobody before you or nobody after you can share. The Talmud says in Sanhedrin, every person is supposed to say the world was created for me. This is not arrogance or narcissism. It's the powerful, humble idea that there's something at stake in your existence. You have something to contribute that nobody before you or after you could contribute. And this is the second statement, the final will and testament that the Baal Shem Tov's father gave him. Don't fear anybody but God and love every Jew. And by extension, it's loving all people and loving the whole universe, because it's all God's universe, with every bone of your body, with every fiber of your being. It's not allowing our fears, not allowing our challenges and difficulties, turning us into people of hate, turning us into people of negativity, turning us into people of judgment. All I'm busy is judging you all day and all night. I'm righteous and you're crazy. I am holy and you're profane. I am moral and you're immoral. I am normal and you're insane. I am balanced and you lost the plot. I am centered and you are an extreme fundamentalist meshugana. That's very, very narrow way of living. Very narrow way of living. It's important to disagree. But even when we disagree with each other, we have to talk to each other. We have to listen to each other. What was the breakdown of Joseph and his brothers, which led to such a terrible conflict? The Torah says in Genesis, in Vayeshev, "V'lo yochlu daber l'shalom." They couldn't speak to him anymore. When we can't talk to each other, when communication breaks down, we are all in danger. I once heard from Elie Wiesel, the great Nobel laureate and Holocaust survivor, Eliezer Wiesel, Professor Eli Wiesel, I once heard from him. He said, you know, Jews argue a lot. Jews fight with each other. We argue. He said, it's just we are a sophisticated people. So we give our arguments sophisticated names. He says, we fight with everybody. We fight with other people, and we call it sociology. We fight with God. We call it theology. We fight with ourselves. We call it psychology. We could fight, but we have to do it. We can argue, but we can't lose trust in each other. It's like in a marriage. A Jewish couple, they argue. A husband has his opinion, a wife has her opinion. But it's important not to stop trusting each other. When we can't talk, when there's a breakdown in communication, it's very dangerous, because then there's a rift. People can't talk to their brothers, to their sisters, to their nephews, to their cousins, to their old friends, to their partners. That's not good. We don't have to agree with each other, but we always have to be able to trust each other. I may not agree with my child, but I love my child and I'm proud of my child. I may not agree with my sister always, with my brother, with my mother, with my father, with my cousin, with my friend, but I trust you and you have to be able to trust me. We have to be able to lean on each other, support each other. This doesn't mean, again, no disagreements, but it means there's a fabric of civilization that must be maintained in order to be able to protect all of us for the future. And that you don't allow to destroy. Don't allow that to get destroyed. And you know what? People may have different perspectives. Maybe a person is 90% wrong and 10% right. Maybe a person is 80% wrong and 20% right. Maybe a person is saying something may be relevant in 30% of the cases. I have learned, don't judge people. Don't dismiss them. Of course, if something is dangerous, and I'm really convinced that something is dangerous, I have to protect myself. And I have to protect my loved ones. Of course, it would be insanity to tell somebody, don't be worried about somebody's health or your own health, or somebody who's vulnerable, or somebody who's sick, or somebody who's old. You have to be responsible. You have to be conscientious. Remember, we choose life. We don't choose death. We do everything. But it's always important to open myself up, to challenge myself, to stimulate myself with information, to be an enlightened person, an educated person, not to put on a hood, cover my ears, cover my eyes, become blind, stupid, and deaf, and just controlled by fear, and that's it. And I can't talk to anybody or anything who disagrees with me. Don't become that person. Never become that person. And even when there's a crisis, and the world is going through a crisis, our response to crisis is not fear. Our response to crisis is love, creativity, expansiveness of consciousness, looking into things in a deeper way, not closing our eyes, but opening our eyes, being curious, being wise, being open, not being judgmental, but on the contrary, asking myself how I can be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And this is what I say to each and every one of us. In the present climate, you and you and you and you and me and us, I can be part of the problem or I can be part of the solution. Being part of the problem is I dig in deeper into my position and I become more stubborn and more angry and more divisive and more political and more saturated with animosity and partisanship and negativity. I become more party line, I become more isolated, and I become more cut off. Or in such a climate, I could say, I want to be part of the solution. And part of the solution means I'm an ambassador of love and light and hope and wisdom and authenticity and integrity and compassion. Because in Judaism, authenticity, integrity, and compassion work together. They're not opposites. Compassion doesn't mean that I'm blind, that I'm stupid, that I'm naive. Compassion means that I realize that we have limited tools, and I have compassion on people who may be stuck. And my compassion doesn't make me judgmental. It just challenges me to create more space and to teach more and to enlighten more with sensitivity, with love and respect, and not to become this holier than thou person saturated with arrogance. So now when we ask this big question, how do we balance in our lives? How do we balance in our communities these two components? How do we really have that ability to protect ourselves and yet opening our hearts to others? This is the great dilemma of COVID. And I wanted to say to you, my dear friends, that I genuinely feel that from a Jewish perspective, these two things should not contradict each other. Never. We should never be forced to choose between protecting myself and opening my hearts to others. And I'll tell you why. Protecting myself doesn't mean I close my hearts to others. Protecting myself means I do what Hashem, what the Torah wants for me to do in order to be responsible to myself, to my spouse, to my children, to my loved ones, to my community, to all people, in order to keep them healthy and safe. But if that's causing me to close my heart to others, if that's causing me to become a vindictive, negative, toxic, judgmental person, now I'm not protecting myself. I'm living in a place of fear. I surrendered my mind to people who are controlling me. A person who cares about life, it's because God wants us to care about life. It's because life is sacred. And then we have to realize everybody's life is sacred and everybody's life is precious. So even if I have to do certain things, but there is an element of understanding and compassion and sensitivity and wisdom, I don't become indoctrinated and narrow and cloistered and homophobic and angry. I see a bigger picture. I see a perspective. I can understand different opinions. I can be respectful of different opinions. And my heart can always be open and can be extremely open. I'll give you one very, very practical example, okay? There's a school here, not far from me where I live. I live in New York. There's a school not far. They live in a neighborhood where there's a tremendous focus on vaccination, a tremendous focus on double vaccinations, on boosters. Now, people are still getting the new variant, but thank God it seems much more benign. This school in the area felt that to have children wearing masks all day is not fair to the children. And since, thank God, the children here have not been affected, so therefore this school said children shouldn't have masks. They should be able to run around freely. They should be able to communicate freely. Let them have this open life. There was an argument about it. Other people felt otherwise. But this is what the school leadership of this school felt, that the children don't need it. It's not essential. It's not endangering anybody's life. And therefore, this is what they felt. Now, somebody came out with such a scathing attack, how they are the worst of the worst, the dregs of society. I spoke to the person. I said, I don't understand you. I could respect a different opinion. But here are respected principals who have watched these poor kids, been in masks now for a long time. For much of a year, they couldn't even go to school. Can't you see another opinion? Do you really have to be so vindictive that all of them are murderers? Maybe there's another opinion that kids should be allowed to run around freely because there is no scientific proof that kids without masks in the schools are endangering people's lives. Can't you see another opinion? They couldn't. I also became responsible for murder. The moment I see that, I said, you're not a rational person anymore. You have completely succumbed to fear. You are not thinking about things in an open-minded way. You are completely controlled by sentiments of certain individuals because you don't even understand there's another side, there's another perspective. Let's understand what's the nature of the virus. What have we learned? Are we privy to all the information? Are we not privy to all the information? Whenever there's no open conversation anymore, where all different angles can be introduced, I know that there's something suspicious. Whenever there's an environment of truth, you can bring everything to the table. I'm not taking sides now about any school because I'm not in the position to take sides. I have my opinions. I have my opinions, but that's not my job. I'm not a doctor. And I'm not the Minister of Education to be able to make these decisions, even though I have my opinions. What I am encouraging all of us is to be able to liberate ourselves from fear and indoctrination, to be able to understand that whatever positions we have, we don't close our hearts to other people. We don't become vindictive of other people. We don't dismiss other people as murderers, as killers, as thugs, as people who want to destroy lives. Even if I disagree with you or you disagree with me, we remain open to each other. And most importantly, we remain fearful of God alone. So we don't have to fear anybody else. The more you fear God, the less you fear people. The less you fear God, the more we become so filled with fear of people. I want to conclude with this story. Reb Moshe, we dedicated the class also to the Yartzeit Sunday of Reb Moshe ben Sion Rubinson, Karalevitzer, which was a famous community of Chabad Hasidim. I'm going to conclude with a beautiful story about the Baal HaTanya, the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi, the author of the Tanya, especially because tomorrow night is his Yartzeit, the 24th of Teves, Chavdalet Teves. And it really speaks to understanding what it means to be a Jew. The Baal HaTanya, the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi, who wrote the Shulchan Aruch Harav, who wrote the Tanya, was one of the great luminaries of his generation. He passed away in 1812 on the 24th of Teves. He was born 1745. He had a son. His name was Rabbi Doiv Ber, Reb Doiv Berel. He later became the Mittler Rebbe. He succeeded his father after his passing as the second Rebbe of the Chabad dynasty. He was a genius, a gon, and he was immersed in learning day and night. And once he was in his apartment on the first floor, his father, the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya, lived on the second floor, on the top floor. And the Mittler Rebbe was babysitting. His wife was away. And there was a baby in the crib. And for whatever reason, the baby fell out of the crib. And the baby was sobbing, screaming. And the Mittler Rebbe, Reb Doiv Ber, was so immersed in learning, he didn't hear the baby crying. His father, the Baal HaTanya, Reb Shneir Zalman of Liadi, he heard the baby crying from upstairs. He was also learning. So he came down and he walks into the room and he sees his son is learning and he doesn't notice anything. So the grandfather, the Zayder, runs over to the baby, lifts up the baby, caresses the child, calms down the baby, sings to it, causes it to relax, checks to make sure that everything is all right. And finally, the baby is fine and relaxed. The baby is soothed and seen and caressed and falls back to sleep. And he puts the baby back in the crib, makes sure that it's safe, it won't happen again. And he goes back to his room. A little while later, he called in his son. And he shared with him some very intense words. And he told him the story. And he said, I want to tell you something, my dear boy. This is not the way of a Jew. The way of a Jew is that even when you're immersed in the deepest form of Torah learning, and your mind is completely engulfed and enveloped by the infinite wisdom of God's Torah, but if it's causing you not to hear the koil yeled boicha, the sound of a child crying, it's not the Torah that God wants. Even when you're immersed in the deepest form of learning, when a child is crying, you always have to be able to hear the sobs of the child and lift up the child, embrace it and soothe it. This was the message that he told them. And of course, he wasn't talking about the physical child crying physically only. That, of course, too. He was also talking about this as metaphoric for life. Sometimes I get carried away by my religious or spiritual experiences and commitments, and I lose touch with the child who's crying. I lose touch with my tears. I lose touch with other people's tears. I lose my sense of compassion. I'm not grounded anymore. I'm not anchored anymore. I become like a freak. And sometimes I'm very holy, I'm very religious, but I'm not in touch with the cries of people. I'm not in touch with the sensitivities of people. I call it science, I call it Torah, I call it religion, I call it God. I become deaf to the reality of people's lives. You become deaf to the cries of children. You become deaf to what people need, to what people are experiencing. Alter Rebbe says, don't do that. Don't do that. Because Torah always must make us more sensitive, more compassionate, more open, more attuned to the yearnings, to the hearts, to the tears, to the laughter, and to the emotions and spiritual, emotional, physical, financial, and bodily needs of other people. Whenever we go deeper into ourselves, whenever we go deeper into our relationship with God, it must never cut us off from others. On the contrary, it needs to make us more sensitive to the tears of a child, to lift up our brothers, to lift up our sisters, to embrace them with love and dignity, and to infuse them with hope and positive energy. In such a climate, I don't want to be part of the problem. I want to be part of the solution. Thank you very much.
Rabbi Jacobson, thank you so much for the incredible way you address this issue which is busy, which is keeps us busy since March 2020. You were able to give us the tools to bridge differences and get closer to each other, and to the community, and to all of us.
May I say some words?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
You hear me?
Yeah,
you hear me?
you for sure. Yeah,
We hear you.
Really, yeah. First of all, I would like to give a big shkoyach to Reb Shmuel Katz and the other organizers of this.
Yes, thank you, Reb Shmuel.
32nd yearly Jarchei Kallo, and for dedicating this year in my honor. And of course, a very, very big shkoyach to Rav Jacobson for his inspiring words. He told us again, the importance of the combining between emunah with medicine. It reminds me of my father, Olav HaSholem, who said to me, when I finished medicine, you should know as a doctor, you need sometimes to say extra tehillim. It's a combination. I never said it to my patients, but we know as a doctor much less than the average patient thinks we know. That's how life is, of course.
That's why he's a good doctor.
Yes, okay. And then I must say, that's a real special comment for me that Rav Jacobson gave this year. And why? You know, it's a positive side effect of this pandemic in which we live, that it enables people to Zoom many more shiurim than before. You need not to go out of the house. You can look on the Zoom. You can see more shiurim than before. You have more time. And in fact, it's how I came across the inspiring and impressing shiurim of Rav Jacobson online. And it's like that with shiurim, I became meanwhile a regular listener whenever I see that he gives a shiur. Rav Jacobson, again, thank you very, very much. Big shkoyach, and who knows when traveling will become easier than now, that we can once meet either in Holland or in New York. I hope to see you then personally. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have already, there are big plans to bring up Jacobson here. So as soon as the restrictions go away, we hope to have you on the plane.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all of you for joining us tonight. Just a reminder, next week, Motzei Shabbos at 8:30, we have a Shiva Rabbi Wegbreit from Yerushalayim, followed by Zmios by Cantor Tzuli Lodstein. And then, of course, we have a big program again, the whole Sunday, ending Sunday evening, again, Mr. Shir in honor of Eli Bio at 8:15. Thank you so much for now. Have a good evening and thank you for joining us. All the best. All the best and Eli Mazel Tov.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Dag, Sjoerd, het Lenny, Hamel.
Jacobson, Mazal Tov en Dr. Bio. Een goed jaar tot 120 jaar. En Schouw gaat Rav Katz voor zijn bijzondere statuut.
Ik hoop je volgende week
Thank
te
you.
zien.
Thank you very much.
Frank,
Thank you.
Frank, je bent de volgende week hier van de partij, hè?
En gezond.
Oké.
Amen. Amen.
Als ik
Amen.
uitgenodigd word, ja.
Bij deze.
Zo.
Geweldig. Oké. Oké.
Kijk eens bij het doorheen. Het is een speciale speedy dag en nacht gedurende je hele leven winstend als een onvermoeibare voor.
Oké, iedereen goedenavond en bedankt. En tot aanstaande Moshe Shabbos. Iedereen hartelijk bedankt.
Dankjewel.
Okay, Stoyer, thank you very much.
It's pleasure.
Thank
It's
you very
pleasure.
much.
It's pleasure.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. All the best. Bye-bye.